You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend. Take another look now and take some time for hemp. I don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. Oh, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rent. Well, right now it's time for hemp.
Thank you for taking time for hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leitch, and it is a brand new year. We're always excited to kick off the new year taking time for hemp. And we suggest that you do the same as well and make it a point to share us with your friends. If you happen to like this particular broadcast, please click the like button below and subscribe. That's how we get found. And of course, share us with your friends. On the program today, we are being joined by Byrne as my joint host. Al has been working as a joint host for Time for Hemp now for about a year. And he's got a great book out that we talk about each week. We want to make it a point to let you know about it so you can get it and share it with your friends. And also on the program is another joint host, Al Graham. And Al, we want to thank you for being part of our big broadcast. Al Graham is up in Canada. And up in Canada, he's got a program that's called PACE. He works with the PACE network, has been for a long time. And he can share more information about that. And we've got a fantastic guest on the program today, James Gierach, and James is going to be talking about a book that he has recently published. And I do want to make it a point to pass this conversation off to my joint host. We'll start with Byrne as my joint host. And don't forget out there, anytime you hear the word joint in the big broadcast, that's when you need to hit your pipe, your vaporizers, your bong, and of course your joint, and take time for hemp. Al?
Thanks, Casper. Good to see you again, Al Graham. It's always nice
see
to
you,
have
Al.
another. Yeah, it's a bunch of Al's here, and we managed to keep it clean.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in this particular show because I'm an author, right? You see down here it says author. That's been an interesting experience to being an author. But I welcome you, James, as a fellow in the art that nobody pays any attention to, but I read all of the inserts and quotes and things that you said on your book. It's very intriguing. I agree with it. I'm sure we're going to go into a debate here, but I mean, your bottom line is, if I understand it correctly, is that we've had this war on drugs. It hasn't worked. It's time to do something else, which is so logical. And that's my experience with this war on drugs, is that logic has nothing to play in it. But I want to hear your arguments. And as we always say, our guest, I'm going to shut up, but our guest is who we really want to hear from. We'll pop some questions at you, but just go for it. And please concentrate if you can. I know it's war on drugs, I get it, but concentrate as much as you can on the cannabis issue. And welcome.
Well, both Al's and Casper, it's really a pleasure to be with you in the company of three authors. My goodness, what trouble we could make. I'm a former Chicago prosecutor, which is what really got me interested in the subject of drugs. And going back into the early 70s, which is when I was prosecuting heavy criminal work in Chicago, I could see that the drugs that were being seized and the arrests that were being made were basically piddly. And the resources that were devoted to incarceration of people who were using cannabis or other drugs was really relatively minimal. And there were some people who were using heroin at the time, and methadone was the accepted treatment. And some of the defendants would come in and they'd be drinking these little glasses of orange juice once a day that contained the methadone. And life was not too bad. The gang problems were not particularly bad. Policing wasn't so brutal. And what I could see through the years as I prosecuted, that the seizures were becoming bigger. The demonization of drugs was greater. The penalties were increased. The drug availability increased. The number of people who were coming into the system increased. The number of people who were incarcerated and taken from their families increased. The drugs kept getting more serious. I recall back when I went to Michigan State University as an undergraduate, and this would have been in the 60s, and the interesting thing where we had the few of the hippies who were walking around in sandals and looking like maybe they could use a shower, but not causing any trouble. And it was in the days of quote unquote ditchweed. And it wasn't causing any trouble. There was no violence. People were maybe throwing their frisbee around and walking their dog and going to the park, but it wasn't a problem. But through these years of prosecuting, I could see that we were going the wrong direction. Instead of less drugs, we had more drugs, new drugs, LSD and PCP and angel dust, and then fake marijuana and K9 and these things that were made synthetically that supposedly were to mimic cannabis or hemp or marijuana, and had nothing really to do with them, that were causing problems. So my interest really in the drug problem was because the violence was increasing, because with prohibition you increase the value of substances, and you end up encouraging people to go into the drug business. And so we ended up with more drugs, more violence, more guns, which led me to the conclusion that not only was the drug war not working for its intended purpose to keep people from dangerous drugs, but it was embracing non-dangerous drugs like marijuana. And it was forever getting bigger. So I came to the conclusion that prohibition, instead of tending to reduce harms, tending to reduce addiction, tending to reduce use, availability, potency, it instead delegates the control of substances to the bad guys. And they decide what drugs are being sold, how much they cost, what's available, what is contaminated with no government oversight, no government regulation, no government control, no taxes. So early on, I came to the conclusion that the war on drugs was drugogenic, corruptogenic, and criminogenic. And as the years went by, things only became worse. And so I was giving speeches. I ran for public office. I ran for state's attorney of Cook County, which includes Chicago, on the idea of drug policy reform. I then ran for governor 2 years later in the Democratic primary on the idea of drug policy reform. And back in the 90s, it was very difficult to suggest that we should do something other than zero tolerance and strict drug prohibition. and if you tried to do it politically, well, you were dead in the water, which meant nobody was talking about any significant changes in drug policy. Well, back in the 90s, there was a fellow by the name of Donald Trump. And at the time, he commented on the war on drugs, and he said the war on drugs is a joke, that we're losing the war on drugs, and that the only way to do anything sensible and to take the money away from these drug cartels is to legalize drugs. Well, jump forward and convert a businessman into a politician, and now, of course, Donald Trump is a drug warrior. And who in the political sector isn't a drug warrior? Overall,
well, I need to jump in here and point out that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has pointed out that we need to end the prohibition on cannabis, and that's one of the things that he wants to do during the Trump administration. And Trump did sign the farm bill that had hemp as a legal cash crop coast to coast. And Trump has recently talked about the need to end cannabis prohibition. That's all I wanted to say at this point. Go ahead.
Okay. So anyway, we had hoped that Biden was going to do something on marijuana. And after all, these various states in the United States have legalized marijuana, both by voters at the ballots saying that we're going to legalize this, and also in some state legislatures where they've legalized marijuana by legislative act rather than by referendum. So we've seen progress. Then we saw President Obama come in and he said, well, what are we going to do? Because we've got a federal law that says cannabis is against the law, but we've got voters in multiple states, and we have legislators in multiple states who are saying that it's okay, that it shouldn't be against the law. And so you end up with this bifurcation and what the rule of law is. And presented with that predicament, of course, President Obama, he had his attorney general say that, if the voters in some state have said this is okay, we are not going to make it a federal priority to go after marijuana users and sellers. It's just not going to be a top federal priority.
The Cole memo.
That still didn't resolve the dichotomy between what's lawful and not, federal law versus state law. And so we were hoping when President Biden was in office that he would make the decision and recognize that drug prohibition is making things worse in all classes of drugs, but also with marijuana. And he, as we all know, was a drug warrior back in the 80s and was responsible for these horrendously harsh penalties and getting tough and cracking down and putting more people in jail, which took America from a prison population of 300,000 people behind bars to $2.3 million in the heyday of our war on drugs, making the land of the free the prison capital of the world.
Yeah.
With the highest rate of incarceration in any country in the world, and the highest aggregate number of prisoners behind bars in any country in the world. And I refuse to believe that Americans are worse than any other people in any other country in the world, despite once in a while maybe Americans doing something not so great.
Well, I was in Europe for a while. I was stationed there for being in the Army. Germans love us, but a lot of people who live in France will tell you that Americans are pigs.
You mentioned the presidents there.
Yes.
I gotta think, like, over the years, Obama, Trump, Biden, they've all had, as you said, the states have all had those legalization movements there. They've all been legalizing. Where you got now? Close to 40 where it's medically allowed, and you're somewhere around 25 for
a little more, I think.
Legalization. Like, so basically, you're well over the majority of the population that is in favor of some form of legalization of cannabis.
Yes.
Would it not just make sense to make it federally across the board. That way you can have interstate transactions. You don't have uneven laws across the country. That was one reason why Canada legalized, because it was being implemented different ways across the country. Instead of where you could have one state where it's draconian laws and another state where it's an open and free market and everybody, is having, making some money or, not going to jail.
Well, Al, make a good point.
Al, remember what I said when we started this conversation. Nothing here can be based on logic. and you're asking a question that any mid-manager of any company would ask about the product that they're trying to deal with. Yeah, there's no sense to any of it. Nothing.
No,
the drug laws so often are nonsensical. During the Ottoman Empire, back in the 1600s, it was a death penalty offense to smoke tobacco. They would execute you.
Well, that might have been a good idea. I don't know. Tobacco's
what
bad for
happens
you.
to be against the law at different times and different ages is a fickle proposition, depending on the people in power deciding what's bad. Well, the United States, leaving Canada for a moment, the United States, we thought alcohol was terrible, and that they were going to have to save people from these drugs. And husbands spending all of their money and their paycheck on buying beer and assorted other alcohol. So a century ago, roughly, in the United States, we decided to have zero tolerance for alcohol. And we ended up with the same problems. We had more guns, more gangs, more violence, more police corruption and corruption of all. And the citizenry themselves were ignoring what the law was. And now, starting in 1961, which is a point I would really like to underscore today, the reason we have a war on drugs, the reason we have such intolerance with marijuana and a host of other substances, because in 1961, we, the United States, and 186 nations of the world agreed to pass the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. And the gist of that document says that the only legitimate use of mind-altering substances are for medical or scientific purpose, not recreational purpose. And of course, what is the major use of drugs? It's not the only use, but one of the major uses is the recreational use. 200 million people, the United Nations estimates uses cannabis. 200 million. In drugs overall, it's like 400 million of assorted different drugs. And the world prison population is 10 million. So, and the United States has a quarter of them. So if we decide we're going to lock up 400 million people, I mean, we wouldn't have enough money to buy each other a glass of water.
Well, and what this means, too, is that if it's 3 o'clock in New York and it's noon in Los Angeles, it's 1961 in Indiana. Because our governor now, it used to be 1955, but we've moved now. Our governor just said, who was just elected, said about 3 days ago, and let me quote, he said, I've been asked about the idea of legalizing cannabis in the state of Indiana, and I've examined it, looked at it thoroughly, and I can honestly say that it makes sense to do that for medical reasons, but for recreational reasons, we're going to have to look at that from a different perspective because it still isn't a good thing to do. But we've got it legal in Ohio and Kentucky and Illinois and Michigan, so all the states around us have it legal, and we're losing a lot of revenue.
Yeah, and of course, being a graduate of Notre Dame, yes, I'll get it over with. Ohio State beat us. The better team won. Notre Dame for they're a great bunch of guys, man. But Ohio State, I'll tip my hat to them. But to get back to Indiana, Notre Dame is in Indiana. When I graduated, it was anyway. And the Pope, you know, the man, the Catholic man, has said about cannabis, if it helps people, give it to them. So, I mean, you know, I mean, that's sort of, again, we're back to basic and logic and stuff. The Pope gets it. He does. Okay.
Well,
and I think your governor gets it. But let me just say something about legalization. Back in the day, as some of you know, I ran Normal back in 90, 91, 92. And we got medical cannabis introduced to the conversation in that period, and hemp with Jack Hurd. I told those guys that were running Normal, with all due respect, James, they were all lawyers. I said, you guys, you're not doing this right. This legalization thing's not going to fly. It's not going to fly tomorrow. It's not going to fly next decade. But what we can sell to the American public is what Jack Hurd's talking about, hemp, and what I'm talking about, which is medical. And that was my thing. And here we are today, and we have medical cannabis well known in the United States. And just for those listening, there is a minimum of 27 countries in this world that have cannabis in their medical pharmacopoeia, meaning that their doctors use it all the time for everything. So it's not an unknown factor in the world. It's just an unknown factor in the minds of the people that are in our government, almost none of whom have any medical training at all. They're not doctors, they're not nurses, they're not scientists, they're not pharmacists, they're lawyers. Again, excuse me, James, but that's what lawyers do. They make laws. That doesn't mean that the laws make any sense, and that's what we're talking about. That's what James is saying. He studied the war on drugs on an international level, and what the United States is doing, it makes no sense. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but to me, that's the key. We got medical, we got hemp, and we did it a certain way. Medical came into the world through education. Hemp came back to the United States through education. The legalization effort has not tried to educate anyone. They just stood up and said, and yelled like Americans do when they're not being paid attention to, and said, I want it legal. Ain't going to happen that way. So your approach is much better. It's much more intellectual. It's based on solid international experience. And so please continue.
Well, I have to make mention of Pope Francis. He's maybe said the things you attribute to him regarding marijuana, but he's also excommunicated the entire mafia in Italy because of their participation in the drug trade. And at the same time, while he's supporting prohibition, it's the primary basis for the financial success of the mafiosos. So it's inconsistent to say, you know, people should be safe from drugs, people shouldn't use drugs, we shouldn't sell drugs, and at the same time say we shouldn't legalize drugs when the all these crises. The reason I wrote a book was because I saw not only was the drug problem a runaway and the crime problem, but so many other things. The problem with trade imbalance, the inability to pay for health care when we're shooting 4,000 people a year in Chicago, where the average cost is $154,000 for the medical care of one person shot. No medical care system can pay that bill. In the United States, we complain about people leaving South and Central America and invading our southern border, which was one of the reasons that President Trump has recently been elected. But why are they fleeing South and Central America? The reason is that the drug gangs are so bad. The violence is so bad. People are fleeing, trying to keep their people, their children, their families alive and safe. And you can't have it both ways. And yet in the United States, we had no political candidate in this recent presidential election who said that if we want to stop the immigration problem, we need to make the drug laws in these other countries better in order to make life more livable, so that people don't have the motivation to try to find some place to escape the violence from these drug gangs. It's just, your son's coming to work for our drug cartel. No, he's not. Boom. How about your other son? I mean, that's the kind of violence. In Mexico, they had multiple hundreds of thousands of people killed, college students and stuff that were missing. Javier Cecilia, famous Mexican fellow, coming to the United States and leading the caravan for peace and justice across the United States, going from city to city, talking about ending the drug war that had wreaked havoc into Mexico, making Mexico unlivable. I had been a speaker and a director for LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And I was invited as one of 60 speakers from around the world to go to Mexico City. And the people were meeting in this auditorium talking about what can we do to stop the violence. And I'm on stage with a man from the United Nations who was a representative of the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. And I get up and say that, you can't stop the violence. You can't stop these drug cartels without legalizing drugs, without changing. There's no end to the gangs. You put a handful of people in prison and they're immediately replaced. You put the Sinaloa drug cartel out of business, and it's not out of business. It maybe bifurcates into multiple cartels, and now they're fighting amongst each other. If we're going to turn the world back into a sensible, peaceable place where we're going to do something with the gangs and the guns and the violence and the unaffordable health care, with the trade imbalance, with drugs coming in and money going out, making police not a militarized force where they see the people as the enemy, but rather as somebody who's trying to help people, going back to the mission of trying to solve crime instead of making consensual drug crime, using some substances, some of which are not only not harmful, but helpful to people's health and well-being, post-traumatic stress syndromes and cancer and just so many things. We have people now who need opiates, and because the DEA is cracking down on physicians, the physicians are afraid their license are in jeopardy. And so people are having operations without any anesthesia. It's just criminal. And Peter McWilliams, who wrote a book that says it's nobody's business if you do. It was a book against consensual crime. Crime is when somebody hurts you, somebody steals your property, somebody rapes you. Those are not consensual crimes. People don't consent to that. But when 400 million people around the world consent to voluntarily buy and sell substances which help them relax after work, help them forget the troubles of the day, or to take time out, whether it's a glass of wine, a cigarette, or whatever other substance it's going to be. We must end the World War on Drugs, which is founded on the 1961 Single Convention, and we need to do that by repealing that convention and the other two UN drug treaties regarding psychedelics and drug trafficking. And governments need to start to regulate and control dangerous substances, putting labels on so you know what's in substances, so that you know which ones are harmful and which ones aren't harmful, which ones are medicine or medicine-like, and those which are not. Well, you got me going.
James, let me throw a question at you, James.
Sure.
We're talking about cannabis and we're talking about drugs, but cannabis is a plant. It's not a drug.
Yeah. So is poppy, the poppy plant, and the coca plant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
plant. There's still processes involved other than like the cannabis, and just go grab it off the field and consume it right there and then, right?
well, again, my point around here is the conversation going forward. The men that and women that are going to decide whether cannabis can be legalized or not, right now, as we sit here having this discussion, see cannabis, marijuana, probably to some of them, as a drug. They do not understand it's a plant. When Louisiana legalized the use of growing cannabis in Louisiana a couple of years back, they assigned the job to the Department of Agriculture because it's a plant. So what I understand internationally is that just as 18 months ago, the summer of what, 22, James, the United Nations and WHO decided that they would deregulate cannabis and turn it loose on the scheduling system, and also understood that it's a plant and it's going to start handling it that way. So my long-term solution has been, and you guys have heard this, James haven't, but when you start to talk about legalizing cannabis, I think what you really ought to start talking to the lawyers in the Senate and the Congress about turning this plant back to the Department of Agriculture and let that department handle it like they handle every other thing we eat and grow in this country and around the world. I've been in this shit for 40 years, and I have never, ever understood what this is all about. I know the theories. I hold some of them myself. But this whole thing has never made any sense to me, and it has never made any sense why a plant has been so denigrated, and it's such a wonderful tool. I have often had conversations with clergy, let me just put it that way, priests and ministers and rabbis, and with the exception of that wonderful rabbi in D.C., most of them are stone deaf. But I've asked them many, many times, they don't want to talk about cannabis. Cannabis is bad. And I said, so God fucked this one up? He fucked this one up. Everything else in your world with your God is fine except cannabis. Why did God fuck this one up? And they have no answer because there is no answer.
Right.
So anyway, James, if you could go international a bit on us. Thank you.
And before you do, James, let me say, somebody's doing dishes in the background. I can't see what's going on, but I keep hearing dishes being cleaned or worse, or something's going on.
That's my puppy chewing a bone. I shall take care of that. Thank you.
All right.
Well, yeah. Talking internationally and about cannabis, Uruguay was, of course, the first country to legalize marijuana use for recreational purpose. And I had drafted a proposed amendment for LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, that would have overhauled all United Nations treaties, eliminating the criminalization of people who use or sell substances, and put in place a system of regulation. And I gave a speech in a side event at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs in 2015. One of the people in the audience was the ambassador from Uruguay, who said, are you going to be here for the remainder of the week? And I said, I will. He said, well, I want to talk to you. He said, because my president, and he explained later, we did get together later, he explained my president legalized marijuana use in Uruguay because he thought it was going to be something good for our people. And he didn't do it to be a leader of drug policy for the world. He was just doing it for our country. And he said at the time that was done, we had many programs that were 50-50 funded by the UN and half by Uruguay. And many of those projects had nothing to do with drugs or marijuana. And he said, but once my president came out and legalized marijuana for recreational purpose, all money from the United Nations was withdrawn from us on every program, having nothing to do, without any word or explanation as to why.
Wow.
So this ambassador, he asked me, he said, why should my president want to lead drug policy for the world when the punishment is economic and makes life harder for the people in my country? And while I tried to give him an answer, but there isn't a good answer, other than we need the people themselves to insist that our leaders get away from drug prohibition, which is an intolerance. You want to know, well, you don't understand, why do we outlaw something in a ditch? Well, it isn't because the plant's in the ditch or an agricultural product or not an agricultural product. It's because people who are minorities can be singled out and prosecuted and put in jail. And under Nixon, Ehrlichman has said that we're trying to figure out, how can we get these people who are smoking marijuana, and how can we get these lefties and these blacks who are not on our side politically? And he said, well, if we outlaw marijuana, we'll get these hippie smokers, and we can get them, and we can get the lefties, we can put them in jail. We can take minorities and put them in jail, making life difficult for them, because we can't outlaw being black, but we can outlaw people who are using drugs, people who are using heroin, people that are using marijuana. We can put them in jail. And Ehrlichman said, and in my book it talks about him quotes him saying, we knew we couldn't criminalize lefties, we couldn't criminalize being a minority, but we could criminalize drug use. And the drug use that was focused on these groups, it was a way to get them. And earlier, marijuana, when they're building the railroads, and the Chinese were accustomed to using opium. Well, we can go after them by criminalizing opium. So it has nothing to do with the plant or its nature. There was a book that was written, Chocolate to, who knows the name of the book? Oh shoot, chocolate to opium, chocolate to marijuana. But all of these things that affect people psychologically, that have all these different attributes of things that grow on plants and otherwise, that politicians choose to make illegal. And it makes life miserable for just so many people in so many different ways.
Well, and I want to give a response as well to Al Byrne's statement about the Christians dealing with it. In today's world, there's so many Christians that are saying with what's going on in the world stage that Jesus is soon to return. We're going to have the rapture any minute. We just don't know the exact time, and I can tell you the exact time Jesus will return. It'll be when marijuana is finally legal, because he and his dad are the biggest cannabis producers in the universe, and his father originally created cannabis, and Jesus would probably be arrested the moment he put his foot down on earth. That's why. So you want Jesus to come back? Make cannabis legal.
Grow organic dope. God, grow organic dope.
At the wedding of Canaan, it was said that they ran out of wine at the wedding feast. And the custom was always to serve the best wine first, and then the wine that wasn't quite so good later on, when people had already had a little, and they might not notice whether this was the cream of the crop wine. And so when they ran out, Jesus said, well, I'll take care of it. And he makes some more wine out of water, and they're serving the wine, and they want to know, why is the best stuff not being served first? It's being served last. And then years later in the United States, of course, we outlaw that, except the Christian Brothers were an exception. They were the only ones who could still make the wine during our first prohibition round.
Now I'm gonna ask a question based on one of the chapters in your book, and it says, "Why is it so hard to change bad drug policy?"
There are 7 reasons that I list in that chapter, and one of them is the economics that I kind of already brought up when I talked about this guy from Uruguay, this ambassador. The United States, with Anslinger, when they first went to put together this 1961 single convention on narcotic drugs, each nation of the world sent somebody to represent their interests in a plenipotentiary conference, which means that the people who went actually had the authority to make a deal on behalf of their respective countries. And when they did that, Anslinger from the United States, sent there by JFK, who was it that earlier had been the head of the Bureau of Alcohol, which became the Bureau of Narcotics,
Right.
and so that he goes over there and he says. Anslinger thought, the reason that prohibition is not working in America is because it's a worldwide problem, and we have to have prohibition worldwide. And so he wanted to see it inserted into the treaties that it was criminalized if you use substances that we deem are bad. And well, some nations didn't go along. I mean, some nations grew these things, the opium and cannabis and this and that. And so that if they didn't cooperate, said, well, this could affect your foreign aid. And so they used that as a way to twist the arms to get countries that didn't want to participate in this 1961 single convention on narcotic drugs to participate. So one of the reasons was economics. That's one of the reasons it's so difficult to change. Another reason is that the good guys and the bad guys are on the same side of the fight. If you're in the drug business, if you're a drug dealer, if you're a drug cartel, you want drug prohibition to continue because it's the foundation for the business. If you're a mafiosa, you want drug prohibition to continue. It's the foundation for the business. But if you're a preacher, you want people to stop using drugs. If you're a policeman, you want the people to stop using drugs. If you're a policeman, we've expanded our narcotics unit from 2 people to 100 people. In the town near where I live, they put up a $2 million police department without it costing the people any money. Why? Because we confiscate the assets of drug dealers and we give them to the police. Half goes to the feds and half goes to the local police agency. So if you ask the chief of police from that neighboring town, are you in favor of the war on drugs? Oh yes. Well, unfortunately, with prohibition, we've got drugs all over the place. So it's another reason. The good guys and the bad guys are benefiting. If you're a prison contractor, you're in favor of the war on drugs. If you're law enforcement, you're in favor of it. If you're a politician, you're in favor of it. If you're a drug counselor, you're in favor of it. It's a way to get money to the good guys, and it's a way to get money to the bad guys.
It used to agitate the hell out of Jack Hare that he would go on the road to talk about the need to end cannabis prohibition and to re-legalize hemp. And he would get donations from growers, but he also said the growers really don't want it legal, Casper, because as soon as it becomes legal, they can't make the money that they're making now. And he said it's difficult when you're fighting your own people.
Sure. And then there's the morality aspect where if you are using drugs, it's an amoral thing to do, not amoral, immoral or amoral. And so in the United Nations treaties that I've been speaking of, they actually say addiction is an evil. And when you talk about evil and you talk about intolerance, and we have to have not just intolerance but zero tolerance. Well, zero tolerance is the opposite of understanding. of not understanding this person who's using drugs had been raped or physically abused or had come through a war and they've got post-traumatic syndrome or has some horrible, painful health affliction that requires them to use a drug that healthy people wouldn't. And then the intolerance becomes so intolerant that eventually intolerance rather goes to misunderstanding and to the point where it becomes war. And so we now have a world war on drugs, which is the manifestation of intolerance and lack of understanding, lack of empathy, lack of caring about one another. And you can't end that war on each other without restoring caring about one another.
Well, and if addiction is evil, what do they do about sugar?
Well, it's a good point.
Right.
I mean, you can't outlaw sugar. I mean, you might as well outlaw gravity.
Right.
I mean, that's what we tried to do with drugs. We tried to outlaw them. You can't outlaw what God put here.
Now, sugar, I look at sugar because it's everything else seems to be something that gets, you high, gets you stoned or whatever. Sugar doesn't do that, but yet it is something that's bad for us to consume.
Well, actually, I think morphine, and the book was Chocolate to Morphine. And these other substances, including sugar, is listed in that book because it does give you a boost. Nicotine in cigarettes is a mind-altering substance. Chocolate. I take chocolate and Oreo cookies, and so does Oprah. She eats a row of, she gets high on marijuana, and she says she eats a whole row of
the sugar rush
of Oreos. So I don't know whether it's the sugar in the cookies or the chocolate.
Well,
or maybe
I just
cannabis is good for her, but those cookies suck, man. She shouldn't be eating that stuff.
I found a recipe on how to make Oreo cookies with cannabis. So.
Oh, there you go.
Well, and I can understand. That's why I quit bringing Oreos into the house, because I live alone and I'm the only one who's eating them. And I never sit down and eat 4 or 5. I sit down and eat one row. And the next day I eat another row.
I just
3 days.
Since we're talking about Oreos, I just saw this internet thing the other day. This guy's got an Oreo. This is for you, Casper. This guy's got an Oreo, and he's got one of these little blow torches, chefs cook with, and he puts it on there for 5 seconds. Nothing happens.
Right,
he puts it on there for 15 seconds, a blowtorch. Nothing happens. It just turns sort of black a little bit, but nothing melts. Casper, as an old friend, stop eating that stuff.
Yes, exactly. Because I saw that on the internet too, and it made me wonder, what are these things made of?
Well, give it some serious thought. But cannabis, as we know, is good food. The cannabis seed is remarkable for its ability to nourish, and I hope that would be one of the other reasons besides economic, James. That what's holding this back? Is it have anything, in your opinion, to do with competition from food industry people?
Well, I once early on wrote to the booze industry and to the tobacco industry because these are consensual things people did, to ask them to help with drug policy, and that was such an ignorant thing to do, because and marijuana is a competition for booze. In many of the referendum states out in the West, particularly, they started using as a campaign device, treat marijuana like wine, or like wine, and it was very successful in helping pass these referendums in many states. But one mind-altering substance can become a substitute for another, injecting economic competition between substances. In Illinois, I mean, my goodness, we're I don't want to say the numbers without having seen them recently, but billions of dollars are going into recreational marijuana. And let me speak to that for a moment. What happens when we legalize a substance, and we have much of the population in these cities where it's being legalized, taking away the income from the low-level drug dealer who's out there peddling something as innocuous as marijuana?
Well, I can answer that real quickly because,
Go
like
ahead.
I said, I'm right next to Illinois, and I had friends who said that they're going up to Illinois. We're going to stop at a dispensary. If you want us to get you some really good herb, let us know. So they told me the dispensaries they were going to go to, and I called up there to find out how much an ounce was of their good primo stuff. $225. And I went, excuse me, I can get a good ounce of primo marijuana on the black market for $125. To which he said, yes, I know. It's hard to compete with that because we have high taxes to pay when we open up the dispensary. We have to cover the cost of our license, and we got to cover the cost of employees and rental. And we cannot compete with the black market.
Yeah, we're having the same issue up here.
Sure. I mean, it's all about economics. It's economics that drives the drug business. It's the economics that continues the drug business. It's the prohibition that makes it economically advantageous to make more money than anything else you can do in life. Nothing pays so well as drugs and substances that people want that are prohibited. But what's happened in Illinois and in other places where they have legalized drugs, when you take, it was like one, I wish I remembered, I haven't read it recently, I wrote it and quoted statistics with footnotes in my book. But they took like 2 billion, 3 billion, I can't remember the number, out of the illegal drug trade for just marijuana in Illinois. And when they did that, those billions of dollars that were going primarily into minority communities, now you've taken away their income. So the ability to pay the rent, the ability to pay the food, the ability to buy the clothes. And so now you've got armed robberies and people smashing cars into Michigan Avenue. Some of the classiest neighborhoods in Chicago where you've got violent crime, you've got expressway shootings, and Trump is talking about, we're going to go back into these cities and we're going to restore law and order, and we're going to get tough, and we're going to deploy military. It's what I call it. It's the withdrawal from prohibition and a prohibition economy where we've had, in effect, federal drug war revenue sharing, where the economy has become drug war dependent for the people with these jobs in diverse things, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys.
Actually, what he's going after at this point is the 22,000 illegal migrants that have come into the city. And because the mayor is now giving the money that was set aside for the black communities and the Hispanic communities to house and feed the illegal migrants, and the illegal migrants have taken up any legal jobs that they had, and they're getting free housing, a lot of them, whereas the black community and the Hispanic communities are not. What they're going after is not the drug dealers, and they're not focused on the drug black market. They're focused on the illegal migrants that are in there that are now being subsidized by the city resources that used to go to the black community, which is why many members of the black community and the Hispanic community in Chicago did rally around the Trump administration coming back in this time around. And they are eager for the removal of the illegal migrants, which I have no problems with migration. And I do believe in having legal migrants in our country. Our country was built on migrants. But when you have a sudden influx, and I do mean a sudden influx of 20,000 migrants coming into your city, that's quite a burden on the tax structure. Here in Indiana, down this road from me, 75 miles in Seymour, Indiana, there was a town of 1,200 people. And now it's a town of 4,500 people because they moved in a little over 3,000 illegal migrants. And they are now working for the Tyson Chicken Company. And the people that used to live there can't. And I can tell you, me being on food stamps, I only get $150 a month on food stamps. But a migrant, an illegal migrant in Seymour, Indiana, my age, is getting $285 in food stamps because they are an illegal migrant. And so that's what really has people up in arms. And I think if you get the 20,000 people that suddenly influxed into Chicago, that might cause the crime problem to go down.
Well, James has got an important point there. You kind of digress from it.
Sorry.
What he's essentially saying is that when cannabis got legalized in a state, that put a lot of people out of business, basically.
Right. That's true.
And that's just a general statement. But then he's also saying, I think, the government or somebody's at fault here, because if you're going to do that, and we want that to happen, we got to have some place for this underground economy to go. They still have their kids to feed. They still want to pay their rent, all those things, right? So, the idea that part of the idea here on the reluctance of government, state or federal, may be exactly what James's point is. I haven't heard this much before, but I think it's very important, what you've just said, that if we're going to take a job away, okay, then retrain the guy. Take care of that family. He was over here, might have been illegal, but they were doing okay, and now they're not doing okay. Well, we got to. So there's responsibilities here that are really difficult if you approach this from a government point of view.
Yeah, I really agree with both of the observations that the two of you made, Al and Casper both. I mean, there's no question that what's happened at the United States borders and the immigration problem have dramatically affected the outcome of the 2024 election for President of the United States. And there's no question that the reason that some of the black voters in this election moved to Trump out of the Democratic column was because they could see, we have needs for our people, and we see people coming across who aren't here legally and who are getting benefits and are being helped, and we're trying to be a welcoming city and refuge for these people. But what about our own people? But then, as Al noted, I mean, these people who used to make their living were these kids, 16 years old, were the ones who were paying 2/3 of the rent bill on the house of some woman who's working as domestic with 4 or 5 kids. And we take away that. Years ago in the United States, we had federal revenue sharing, and the federal government would take big chunks of money, send it to the states. The states would then send it to local units of government like counties and cities and villages. And then the cities and villages would be able to hand out this money to library districts, park districts. They could use it really as they chose. And some of those monies were used for better purpose than other. But in effect, with our drug prohibition policies in the United States, we have created this opportunity for employment, for promotion, for limitless income, for making kids decide, well, I can make more money in the drug business than I could do by going to school and flipping hamburgers. So they take that choice. Now we end up with generations of kids that are uneducated, who aren't qualified to do something. And then we take away the means by which they survive in this society that we created. We have a drug war dependent society that has to be weaned off of prohibition in order to make things healthy again. We have
what you were talking about. I don't
problem.
mean, I don't mean to interrupt, but what you were talking
Go
about
ahead.
sounds like what they were doing in Alaska with their oil drilling. I guess at the end of every year, every Alaskan citizen would get a check from the state of Alaska as part of their share of the profits from the oil industry that inhabits that state. So that's kind of like what you're talking about, isn't it?
Well, I'm talking about economic principles, supply and demand, and the effect that prohibition has on price, and the availability and the incentive to invent drugs, to create new drugs, to import drugs.
When the states legalize that down there, do they have do they reach out to, we call it the legacy market up here, a lot of us, do they reach out to try to get them to transition into the legal market? I know that here in Canada they've said that to many people, but there's always the barriers. There's the cost, there's the all the permits that are required and the licensing and this and that. It just becomes easier just to stay where they are versus trying to jump into the legal markets. Like, do you down there offer that in any of the states to try to bring people over?
In the United States, we have licenses which they try to allocate for some minority owners because the numbers for a license are just, I mean, astronomical. So, I mean, I was in, where in the heck was I? I was in Colorado, up in the mountains, and they're putting in a new marijuana dispensary. And I'm wondering, as they're putting the building up, who owns this thing? Well, it's the son of a football franchise owner, who's got the money to pay for the licenses and stuff. The social equity allocation of licenses, what they're talking about it. But in Illinois, as in other places, we've had a very difficult time because the rich come first. And so that then you have all these people fighting over these minority ownership licenses. So it has not been a great success by any means. And it certainly does very little to compensate the vast number of people, because even if you award a few licenses, and so you have 10 people working in a dispensary, it doesn't begin to accommodate how many people you've got standing out on corners and, hey man, I got good ganja, good weed. It's not commensurate.
Now you're one of those highfalutin people who travels a lot, so you've heard of bi-coastal. Well, you're bi-statal, right? You live in Illinois and Florida. I tell you, these foreigners. Now, is there much of a difference between Florida and Illinois, and what's going on in both those states? I know Al knows. Al Byrne's in Florida too.
Well, there's Florida. There's no legal recreational marijuana yet. They I think they have passed medicinal marijuana, but it's still politicians here thrive on intolerance.
I hear it's coming for another vote.
Can you grow it?
No,
James
James is right. Down here we have medical cannabis. It's get a doctor to recommend it. Pay a fine, pay a fine, pay a fee to get a card. But the availability of high quality cannabis is pretty good. Tallahassee must have 20 to 24 cannabis retail outlets. Some of them drive up through stuff. The last elections thing here in November, Florida just missed by half a percentage point or something with an initiative that would have allowed recreational cannabis for people over 21. The reason it essentially failed was that the smoke. All the anti-advertisement down here, and it was humongous. Right at the end, there was thousands of dollars being sent by somebody. It was all about smoke, and it was all dead fucking wrong. But again, apparently you can lie on TV. What the hell, So, but like I live in the sheriff won't mind me saying this. I live in Franklin County, which is in the Panhandle area, and our sheriff's a great guy, and he's told everybody in this county that he doesn't find cannabis a problem at all for adults. He says, I don't want to see it in my school, and you better not be the guy delivering it there. But he now, on the other hand, he's rightfully so, in my opinion. He spends all of his time, as far as I'm concerned, the drug guys here, chasing down methamphetamine and fentanyl.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is some logic, even though I'm contradicting myself, at least at the local level. But here you're dealing with a sheriff who knows his people. He knows how they react to different things. Alcohol here is, I live in a town whose slogan is unofficially a little drinking village in Florida with a fishing problem. But again, they define themselves as a drinking village. He's a fisherman. He's a shrimpers and oysterman, and they're a rough crowd, and they do a rough job, and they're great people. Anyway, enough of me again.
Well, and Al Graham, I know from one to the other of our next new state, our 51st state soon, right?
Well, you missed that poll, didn't you?
You want to tell us how it is up there in our next new state?
Marijuana legalization is inevitable. Marijuana legalization will be everywhere. We have reached the tipping point where we have won over public opinion. People realize that it's foolish to be outlawing something that's helpful to people, that people can use recreationally, responsibly, that people are not dying from, and it is unstoppable.
That sounds like a good place to end. But before we say adieu, James, is there how about pushing your book one more time? How do people buy it? People can
go to Amazon and simply put in the name, The Silver Bullet Solution. Is it time to end the war on drugs? And the answer to that is yes. And buy the book, read the book, write a review, and accelerate the end to the war on drugs, which is a world war on drugs that's been going on since 1961, our longest war in the history of the United States. That does immeasurable harm to people around the world, that is unstoppable without reforming international drug policy and national laws, which are put into place in furtherance of those international treaties. Prohibition. Al Capone is in favor of prohibition, and the good people in America and around the world should be against prohibition.
Amen.
Yeah, and prohibition.
Well, thank you, sir. That was a great conversation. Yeah.
It's an honor to be with all of you.
Al Byrne, you want to do a plug where your book too? Why we got you here?
Who, me?
Yeah.
I'm not. I've looked at excerpts of James' book, and he's far more studious, intellectual. All his nice words. He's a good writer, very precise in what he's trying to define. I tried to do the same thing and for country and cannabis, but I got a different book. Mine is the story based. It's a history book. It tells you how did medical cannabis come to be anyway. This stuff just doesn't happen. So I wrote down this book because I wanted the people that did the trench work, who nobody knows, nobody will ever hear of us if I didn't write this book. So I wrote the book. I want them remembered. And that includes not only healthcare professionals, but a lot of attorneys, James, certainly patients, soldiers, all kinds of people who who got what we have now, and a lot of people again take it for granted. Don't take anything for granted. So it's a history book, but it also, I hope, would provide most of you with knowledge about the cannabis plant and its medical benefits that you've never heard before. I know you think you all know everything. You fucking don't. And the problem that James and I have is that this is about right now. This is from my publisher. Only about 30% of high school graduates in the United States, Al, I don't know about Canada, but only 30% of high school graduates ever read a book again.
Yeah.
And that doesn't get any much better for college graduates. You go get a college degree, a university degree, the number jumps up to about 40%. So only 4 out of 10 college graduates ever read another book again. This is why I started out years ago using education to get to people that don't read books. But anyway, I wrote mine, and I want you to read it. And just like James, the best thing you can do if you like a book, and James brought it up, is write a review. Just a sentence. I like this thing. This guy helped me. Anything at all. We would appreciate it. And our message then, and the message you're probably agreeing with, gets a little broader, and it educates, and there's a ripple effect, I guess. All right. So again, James, it's been a pleasure. Always with my 2 friends here, but you've helped us. You've given me a lot of things to think about. I'm paying attention here, and we'll try and do our best to spread your message as well. So thank you.
And thank you to all of you.
And Al Graham, you do a lot of work with the Pace Broadcasting Network, and you are busy getting the message out. Why don't you let people know more about your work and how to find you?
Well, you can find the Pace Radio Network at paceradio.net. I am also involved in another project called the 420 Pace Project, where I'm involved with other content providers and getting the word out to make our voices even louder. As far as the Pace Radio Network, we're doing approximately 6 or 7 broadcasts a week. That runs from Sunday through till Thursday. We don't have a show on Fridays. We cover cannabis as well as psychedelics, and we have news, and we do interviews as well. So, and go ahead.
I'd like to jump in here and let everybody know that these 3 gentlemen are all found at the timeforhemp.news archives. James became a regular guest on my show back, I think, in 2013, 2014. When we started doing the global broadcast of Time for Hemp. And he was a part of LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition at the time. And Al Byrne was busy working with patients out of time. And he also produced a show on the broadcasting network at Time for Hemp. And Al Graham was a very frequent joint host. There's that magic word, joint host, here on Time for Hemp. And they are 3 of my oldest and dearest friends. I count myself blessed to have them as part of our broadcast. Saying that, too, let us all do a little quick remembrance of Peter Criss. He left us here shortly. And Peter Criss was one of the founders of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And Peter would come on every Wednesday as a joint host. And we interviewed people from the Law Enforcement Against Prohibition organization. And his work was also very important to this movement. If you like this broadcast, please share us with your friends. Again, hit the like and subscribe button below, and do make it a point to let everybody know that it is Time for Hemp.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spent. Take another look and spend some time for him. Don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yes, it's time for him. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 bales of oil. No need for pesticides to
Time for Hemp is a Pace Radio Network content provider.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
When you have a pain that's reached its peak, Legacy for 20, it's so unique. If organic cannabis is what you seek, here's your trusted partner 7 days a week. Suppository salves, vapes and drops, topicals, edibles, infused pop. Just when life seems like it ain't easy, at Legacy 420, enjoy a pop freezy. Lab tested products, make them the GOAT. Legacy 420 out on your road. Legacy 420 in Tyndonega Mohawk territory. Indigenous organic cannabis at its finest.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.